Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hammer Podcast. But before I begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the videos, share them with your friends, and please comment. It helps this channel out a great deal. Now, it's April 13th, 2020, and we have Cindy on the line. Cindy also attended the Bethesda Home for Girls and wants to tell her story of her experience there. A note to everyone. This is a free and open discussion, and I encourage everyone who is on the show to speak their minds and don't worry about anything. So, without further ado, let's hear Cindy's story.
Okay, my name is Cindy, and I can't remember the exact year
Okay.
that I went into Bethesda. A lot of girls have such blocked memories. A lot of us don't remember what year we got there. We've figured out kind of what years we were there by communicating and remembering each other. But a lot of us didn't create friendships when we were there, so it's kind of hard. We will remember a first name but not a last name, or a face but not a name, because we weren't allowed to create friendships when I was there. I think the biggest problem when you talk to a lot of the girls from Bethesda is that we were all there at different times. And like in the 70s, I think Dot and Bert worked there. And so you have a lot of stories from the girls that work the outside crew that have stories of being raped in the barn,
Oh,
stuck in chicken coops, in the Mississippi summer with no water. In the 80s, you have a different group of girls with different stories. And then in the late 80s, like 84, 85, 86, and further on, the FBI had raided them. So they were like kind of on their best behavior. So those girls' experiences were quite different than the girls in the early 80s or in the 70s.
right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So my biggest issue is that so many of these places are not regulated. They say that, and they actually set up in cities and towns where there's no regulations that are required of them. So there was a gentleman, Mr. Fountain, that opened the Bethel Home. He was a heroin addict who had just gotten out of prison.
Wow.
So he started the Bethel Girls Home, and I have a girlfriend that was there. And then, I think that in order for them to open up these children's homes, that the staff should at least, it should be required that the staff have some kind of formal training. Not just, Bible preaching, screaming, but actual backgrounds in some kind of field that they could actually help the kids.
Right, right.
Because that's what they're saying that they're doing.
You're talking like a college degree, something like that.
Something.
Yes.
Some kind of, some kind of training. You can't be a social worker without having gone through school, guiding the behavior of children classes, something.
Well,
Just because you got out of prison and went to church a couple times and met Lester Roloff and you can make a lot of money off of housing children, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. There should be some kind of regulations.
yes, yeah. But sometimes their way of saying they are qualified is they're saved, and Jesus is guiding them. That's the only requirement for them.
Yeah, it's shocking. And
Yes.
so another issue that I have that a lot of the girls, whether it's Rebecca, Hesba House, Bethel, Bethesda, none of the girls had their periods. None of them, which I don't understand as well. If you look it up, whether it's pregnancy or
Trauma.
menopause, which, trauma. But here's the thing. I grew up in a lot of group homes with a lot of girls. I always had my cycle until I got to Bethesda.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of, if you talk to kids that have been in group homes all over the world,
Yes.
very few of them don't have their cycles. But for some reason, all the Lester roll-off homes, none of the girls had cycles. Now, I remember us standing in long lines getting our vitamins or drinking milk that tasted like onions, and we would get in trouble if we didn't finish our milk. And I remember feeling like I wasn't all there, like my mind wasn't all there.
Interesting.
So it's just really twisted. And another thing that I hate when they call the girls wayward girls,
Uh-huh.
most of these girls came from Christian backgrounds. They didn't listen to rock and roll music. They'd never had a boyfriend. You know, a lot of them had sexual abuse that was going on in the family, and they were acting out because they were trying to get it to stop. And so that was kind of my case. I came into Bethesda begging them to call the police because I had been through horrific abuse. I was only it was either 12 or 13 when I went in.
Okay.
And I was one of the pregnant girls. But
Ooh.
I didn't know that I was pregnant. And because none of the girls had their periods, you know, I didn't even know what pregnancy really was. I was a child. No one had ever explained any of this to me. So to date, I have no idea if my baby lived or died. I have no idea where she is. I just have no memory of any of that stuff. And it's traumatic. A lot of these girls cannot find their babies. And, you know, whether you want to call it adoption or, you know, some of the girls agreed to adoption, but a large majority of the girls did not. Their babies were just taken from them. And it's called black market babies, period.
Yes. Illegal adoptions.
Yes.
Yes.
It is. So, and no medical care. I mean, so many of these girls received zero medical care. I mean, if you have an entire building full of girls and all of their periods stopped, they should have gotten medical treatment to find out why.
But if they did though, then secrets would be revealed, so to speak.
Yes.
You get the
True.
you know, the police or the emergency medical people in there. Then the girls are going to start. They're going to feel, okay. These authority figures are here. Let's go ahead and tell them, and they can probably do something about it. You know what I mean? So it's just something that
Yes.
they did not want that. They wanted total control. So,
I agree.
yes.
And another thing that I wanted to point out about the paddling,
Uh-huh.
I think that all these homes, in order for them to run smoothly, you have to have strict rules. You have to have the girls helping with chores. So I never had an issue with the strict rules or the chores. What I had an issue is that they completely broke us down. They stripped us of dignity. They would set you up for failure, and then when you failed, you would get paddled. There was no compassion. There was no kindness. You know, if girls cried, we were forced to stand around them and call them babies or make fun of them. It's like it was encouraged for us to belittle and harm and humiliate each other. It's like if you could tell on somebody, you got brownie points, you know, and they, instead of them taking all that money they were making that our parents were sending to house us there and hiring qualified staff, they would just take the girls that had earned the status of trusted and put them in charge, which created a whole environment of like Lord of the Flies.
Right. That sounds.
And I also hate the word runaway. You know, we knew that if we ran away,
Yeah.
that you know, they would give us horror stories about we were going to die, they were going to shoot us. You know, they were constantly trying to create fear. I mean, how else do you house a couple hundred girls and only have one staff member there? You know, we could rise up at any moment and take over. But the way that they controlled us was that constant fear.
Right.
So these girls weren't running away, they were escaping. And some of them, I mean, they would rather die running away than to stay one more second in that place. I mean, it was torment from, it's weird. It's like all of our memories are completely blocked. We have little bits and pieces. And every once in a while, because we've all found each other and we have this big group of girls that we've been talking, somebody will mention something and you're like, oh my God, I forgot about that. But the only memory that I really have of being so hungry, like starving all the time, and being afraid all the time, and not being allowed to make eye contact with other girls. I mean, it's different if you're acting out, you're misbehaving, or you're doing something wrong, but we got in trouble for simple things like looking at another girl or touching, you know, another girl or being friendly to another girl.
Yes,
it was just crazy.
Friendships were discouraged.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was constant, like we had to memorize. And if you're a 12-year-old pregnant girl who has been traumatized, Memory is their kind of a hard thing. And to have to memorize an entire chapter, or you weren't allowed to eat, or you would get paddled. That was hard to do, but it was so ingrained that for years and years later, if I passed by a church, which trust me, I will never ever step foot into a church because it's traumatizing to me. So if they're trying to lead us to God, they did the opposite. Most of us won't step foot in the church. We can't handle people preaching at us. We can't handle certain hymns. But it's like after I got out, if I passed by a church and it had a Bible verse on the outside of the building,
right,
I literally would have to say it out loud because Lester Roloff or Mr. Wills, Papa Wills, would walk down the hallway, hold his Bible up and go, Psalm 1. And whatever you were doing, you had to stop. And in unison, you would bark out these Bible verses.
right. That's the way
it was so ingrained that even in adult life, I felt like I had to, under my breath, I had to say it out loud.
That's the way it was at the Rebecca home. Lester Roloff would yell out, Psalm 121, and then all in unison, almost like robots, like zombies. It's like, what is going on here? They're being, well, it's brainwashing, is what it is. Of course, Pop, yes, Papa Wills, as he calls himself. He called it because I know the Southern Poverty Law Center had did a lawsuit on them, and on behalf of some of the girls there. I think it was in 1978 or something like that. And he was saying that Papa Wills would say, well, it's not brainwashing, it's heart washing and blood washing. It's like, no, it's complete brainwashing. You can't get around
It
that.
is brainwashing. And when I
So,
got there, I begged them to help me. I told them that I had been raped for years. And instead of them comforting me, calling the police, getting me help, instead they called me a whore. They called me a slut. What was I doing to provoke it? Well, look at you. Look how you're dressed. Look at the makeup you have on. It's, you asked for it. And then they would give me the lecture about honoring my mother and father and being obedient.
mm,
I just,
yeah.
and then they send me back without once, if they're doing what they say they're doing, which is helping girls, they didn't help anybody. Not really. I mean, some of the girls say they were helped, and I'm sure that they were to some degree, but this place stripped away their dignity. It stripped away their ability to set healthy boundaries, even much later in life. If you look at the after effects of this kind of emotional and mental abuse and this type of brainwashing, it affects you way, way later in life.
Oh, yeah.
It affects your self-esteem. It affects your ability to communicate, have healthy relationships, set boundaries. All of those things become impossible.
Some girls can be emotionally wrecked from that, and they end up going to drugs and alcohol and going to psychiatrists and therapists, and they just can't get over it. It
Yep.
happens.
It's like the simple act of taking a shower. Like, it's really weird. We all talk about blocked memories.
Hmm.
I have zero memory of ever taking a shower in Bethesda. I have memories of scrubbing the shower with a toothbrush, but I have no memories of actually taking a shower. But I do have a memory, and it was triggered by another girl telling the story. I would have to get completely naked and then do a crab walk to the showers.
What?
Yeah, and it was crazy. I remember I happened to stand up, like they would wake you up in the middle of the night and make you stand with your nose an inch from the wall with Bibles in both hands. And if your arms dropped below your shoulders, then you would get paddled. Or if you fell asleep and your nose touched the wall, you would get paddled. I mean, these are impossible things to accomplish. And that's what I mean by you were set up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was constant. Like, I remember the constant mental abuse. And it stripped you of so many things. Like, we're all, like, most of us kind of got out, went about our lives, never thought of it. And then one day we all found each other. And it was traumatic remembering all of these things. But you also realized how it had affected your life.
All the memories
so
just
many
flooded.
profound ways.
All the memories just flooded in. Yeah.
They did.
Yeah. And that's
And then, like the Mr. Fountain, the heroin addict that opened up that Bethel girls' home.
uh-huh.
He went on, and this is what I mean about they need to be regulated. He continued to get worse and worse and worse and worse because no one was monitoring him. And when the FBI finally came in and closed down, Bethesda, they just moved to Missouri and set up another kids' home where there was no regulations, and a child died there. So not only did Connie Munson die, but another boy died at the home that they opened up, Mountain Park.
Yes, yes, I heard about that. I read it in an article. Yeah. So yeah, it's like I said, if you don't have any regulations, it's basically a free for all when it comes to discipline. They can do whatever they want to you. That's how it goes.
And another thing, the girls they found out that if they would injure each other, or they were actually stabbing each other to get out. Like, if I stab you, then I'll get kicked out, and you get to go to the hospital, and you get to get out too. But I can't stab you too much. It was just crazy, the desperation that we felt to get out.
Willing to try anything to get out of that place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah,
and like I said, if you showed emotion, if you cried, no one consoled you. No one, patted you on the back and was like, it's going to be okay, you're going to be all right. Instead, you were met with even more violence, even more hatred, and more insulting, and more yelling, and more. It was saw as a sign of defiance.
Yeah. You were talking about the thing about doing the crab walk naked to the bathroom or to the shower. Were the guys were the male authority figures making you do that, or was it the women, their wives?
The women. The women. The first 3 months you were there, as you know, you were given a helper.
Right.
That helper watched you poop. You couldn't shut the door and go to the bathroom. Once again, that's a form of abuse.
Yes.
You were only allowed to have like one or two blocks of toilet paper to wipe with. God forbid if you got sick or had stomach problems, you were in trouble.
Yeah.
When I was there, I got what's called black tongue. It's when you're so malnourished that the poison in your body, like you have no good bacteria to kill the bad bacteria,
right,
and it builds up in your system, and your tongue literally turns black, and you have diarrhea. Well,
yeah.
I wasn't allowed to have toilet paper, so I had to wash myself any way that I could. That's humiliating. So there was a lot of things that you can't quite put your finger on because it doesn't sound like physical violent abuse, but it was emotionally damaging every inch of the way, to the point where you left there so stripped of dignity that when you came out, you couldn't make eye contact with other people. You didn't know how to talk to other people. You didn't know how to sit, pee, stand, talk, walk, eat without somebody telling you when you could. And even in prison, they have rights, but in these girls' homes, they have no rights.
Yeah.
I mean, they strip you of every human right and all of your dignity.
Wow. Did they have cameras in that place?
There were no cameras when I was there, but they did have intercoms set up, and they would play religious tapes on them. Or another reason why I strongly believe that we were drugged is because there are some drugs out there which would stop you from having periods, but also cause seizures. Okay. And a lot of the girls, it's like my whole life, I've never really met anybody that had seizures. Mm-hmm. But when I was there were tons of girls that would have seizures, including me. I had a couple seizures when I was there. And so a girl would go out in the hallway and they would call it fits. They would say that the devil was in the girl and she was having a fit. But what she was having was a nervous breakdown or a seizure. They would make us all go in our rooms and lock the doors. And she would be in the hallway thrashing and screaming and wailing. And they would make us we would go in our rooms, and they would come over the intercom, and they would make us sing louder than the girl that was in the hallway screaming.
Oh my goodness.
And so we would try to drown out her screams. Whenever a girl would become, lose it pretty much.
Yeah.
We were supposed to sing and drown her out. And there was one girl that actually broke through. There was a metal vent at the bottom of the door, and she broke through the vent. But it
Did
was
they?
just insane. Even our sleep, like they would come in our rooms and flick the light on, and we would all have to hold our fingers up so they could come and smell our fingers to make
What?
sure we hadn't touched ourselves.
Oh my good. Oh,
It was like
that
insane. It was like
that's just sounds like a bunch of perverts, is what it sounds like.
it was hell.
Yeah, yeah.
It was hell. Like I said, I've lived in a lot of, I grew up in foster care. When I left Bethesda, um, I went back home to a pretty violent situation, and I ended up in foster care. And I grew up in tons of kids' homes. It was never like that. I have vivid memories of every home I ever lived in. I have vivid memories of friendships. I have vivid memories of lots of things. But my Bethesda time is so blocked. It took me 3 years in therapy just to get the tiniest little memories back. And you don't have blocked memories if it's not a traumatic event.
Right, right.
So,
You're
all these girls, if you read online and you go over story after story after story of all these girls, one of the things, the common threads is not having periods, having blocked memories. Blocked memories come from traumatic events, not from, hey, it wasn't that bad there. It was traumatic. You may not be able to put your finger on it, because a lot of these girls already came from abusive backgrounds,
uh-huh.
but what they did there was equally traumatic. And if they have blocked memories, that's a sign of abuse.
Now you said there was. Did they beat any of the girls like with belts
You got
and
paddled all the
you
time.
got paddled all the time?
Never with a belt, always with a board,
Oh, the
always with a
infamous
board.
the infamous paddle. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So there was.
And it could be for anything. I mean, you were always lined up getting paddled for something. And I remember they had a long hallway we would stand in to eat, and there was a water fountain at the end, and it was a habit for you to drink as much water as you could, because when you ate, they usually gave you such small portions
Hmm.
that you were still hungry. So if you filled your belly with water, then you would be still full. And if they had food left over, they would call up the skinny girls. They could come have seconds.
Hmm.
But that's another thing. Like once a week, we had to what they called fasting, where you weren't allowed to eat for the whole day.
Right.
And it's funny because there's a lot of discrepancies in the whole food thing. I think there were times like when I first got there, the Wills had just kind of taken over, and they weren't getting as much money because us going to various churches, we would go to churches and we would sing, and then you'd have to go up in front of the people and say, my name is Cindy, and I was the bad girl, and Bethesda saved me, and then you would immediately look at Mr. Will to make sure he was his approval of
Right.
what you had just said, and then we would sing, and then he would preach, and then they would pass the plate, and they made tons and tons of money off these churches. But I think in the in between times when there wasn't a lot of money coming in is when there's a discrepancy of how much food we got and what we didn't get. Because I hear a lot of girls talking about how that great the meals were. I remember starving all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is awful. Um. So along with the beatings, was there any other type? I mean, there was mental abuse. There was physical abuse. Was there any sexual abuse at all?
Not when I was there. Mr. Wills was very rarely there. You very rarely saw him. You saw Miss Wills. There was an old lady there named Miss Ruth. And other than those two women, I don't remember there being anybody watching over us. And Mr. and Miss Wills would leave all the time and leave us with this Miss Ruth. And then the girls kind of took over. There was the only sexual abuse I ever saw was there was a really heavy set girl who also had seizures all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while she would try to fondle you and you would have to fight her off. But when I was there, I don't remember there being sexual abuse. Like I said, when Bert and that other lady Dot were there before I came, I've heard there was a lot of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
But I was put there, and a lot of girls were put there under false names. Like they put me in that place under Cindy Ola, and all of my school records were under Cindy Ola. My name was never Cindy Ola.
Yeah.
So how could I have signed adoption papers? It would have been under an illegal name.
Yeah. That's interesting. So basically, um, this Mister, or I call him Papa Wills. I guess that's what he is. He still around? Is he still alive? Has anybody even tried to find out if he's still alive or anything like that?
Yes, they are on Facebook actually under Mr. and Miss Wills.
Are they?
And what is her name? God, I can't remember her name. She's on Facebook. I friended her when I first found the Bethesda site, and I asked her about the adoption of my baby, my school records,
Uh-huh.
and she wasn't very helpful. And then she shortly after that kind of deleted and blocked me because I
Oh,
was asking questions.
yeah.
But yeah, she's on Facebook, and it blows all of our minds because when we were there, we were taught, pork was a sin, pants were a sin, chocolate was a sin, breathing was a sin, and and then you go on her site and she's doing all the above, and you're like, wow, when did it not become a sin?
Well, do as I say, not as I do. It's basically how it goes. When I
I
was
thought
when I
sins
was
were.
right when I was a kid, I was at the roll off. I wasn't at the homes. I was at the Christian school that they had, and it was just. I mean, it was the same thing. The paddling, the demeaning. It was all like that, and it just basically made us hate them more. It wasn't. Usually when you if you're having a good time at a place, when you leave, it's okay. Well, I can't wait to come back. Well, these places, even going, like I said, we didn't stay at the farm. We had a home in Corpus Christi, so we'd go there. But we'd get up in the morning and say, "Oh, I got to go back to that place." I mean, it was just you just didn't want to be there. You know what I mean? And I could
Exactly.
just imagine those girls like you who had to be who were living there. It's just I can't fathom what you went through. I mean, it's just horrific, horrific.
It was insane. I mean, I spent a 2-day bus drive with my pedophile rapist, and he dropped me off and walked out the door, and I was just there. And then, it. I guess I was there a year. I don't remember. I remember October 21st is the day I left, but I'm not exactly what year it was. But I remember them coming in my room at like 3 o'clock in the morning,
Hmm.
and they gave me a new pair of shoes, a new skirt and a top, and put me on a plane, sent me back home. And I remember it was just the scariest thing ever to go from not hearing a radio or a TV or have human contact, and all of a sudden you're in a plane packed full of people, and it was loud, and I just felt just completely like I'd been put on another planet, and I couldn't find my way. It was horrible.
Now,
It was absolutely horrible.
you said that they would pump the sermons through the intercom. Was it Mr. Wills that was doing the sermons, or was it another pastor? Do
It
you
was
do you remember?
Lester Roloff
Lester
sermons. It was
Roloff sermons.
Mr. Will. It was the old lady, telling us Bible verses, making us sing songs. And it was also a way for them to listen to us. So we lived in a constant state of don't speak, somebody will hear you. Don't laugh, somebody will hear you. Don't sit on your bed, you'll get in trouble. They literally taught us how to sit, when to stand, when to eat, when to breathe, everything. Your days were very, very regulated and very rigid, which once again, I understand when you have that many girls, you have to have strict regulations and strict rules. But like I said, you were set up for failure, and when you did, they jumped all over it. It was like this gleeful moment, like, aha, you made a mistake, and now we get to beat you. And that's not discipline. That's abuse.
It almost seems like they took pleasure in it. In
They did, and the thing is that they would hit you so hard, like my tailbone. I think they broke my tailbone once when I was there, and you got to think I was a pregnant kid getting beat. It's just unbelievable that would happen.
and being pregnant, you never went to the hospital to get checked out or nothing like that.
Never went to the doctor, never went to the hospital. As a matter of fact, speaking of blocked memories, I literally had zero memory of my pregnancy. So I get out of there, I go through life, I give birth to my first daughter, and when I'm in the hospital, the doctor says something about the nurse said she's tearing, and the doctor said it's okay. It's where her other episiotomy scar is. And I looked at the doctor and I looked at the nurse and I said, I've never had another baby. And they both looked at me like I had lost my mind. And then, so anyway, to make a long story short, I completely blocked all of that out. And about 3.5 years ago, I'm sitting in a Food Lion parking lot with a car full of groceries, and I go on the Bethesda Girls Home website.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the girls, you know, they have to invite you in. They won't let anybody go on there. You have to answer questions.
Right.
And one of the girls referred to it as an unwed mother's home. And then I saw another girl, and she's like, "Oh, I remember you." She goes, "I remember you were tiny, you were pregnant." She goes, "Your belly grew before your breast did. You were flat-chested when you got there." And it was weird seeing a pregnant child. And I was like, "Oh, no, you have me mistaken by somebody else." And she's like, "No, I remember you. You were Cindiola. You were pregnant." And the thing that when she said Cindiola, it let me know that she definitely knew who I was, because nobody in the real world knows that was my name. And so I literally had like this nervous breakdown in a Food Lion parking lot with food melting in the back seat, because it was like everything came flooding back. And so you have this complete breakdown. And so anyway, I left there and I went to a bank that I've been going to for 20 years. And when I handed the lady my check, I couldn't make eye contact with her. And when I opened my mouth, no sound would come out. I instantly ran back to Food Lion parking lot and called a therapist and signed up, because I knew that I was losing my mind. Yeah. And since then, I did contact my family members and ask them, was I pregnant? And they said, "Yeah, that's why you went there, to cover up that Garrett, you know, your stepdad had raped you and got you pregnant." Wow. So I completely blocked out a pregnancy.
That's hardcore right there. That's
it is.
But it's
here's
good.
The thing: when I was in therapy, see, I truly believe that my therapist kept trying to get me to do this repressed memory stuff, and I finally agreed to it. But I also believe that you can have false memories. So when she did the repressed memory, this little bar that you have to watch, and it goes back and forth, and they help you unblock memories, which is the worst thing I could have ever done. Because when I unblocked the memory, I actually remembered giving birth in a bathroom floor. Mr. and Miss Wills were out of town. The only woman there was Miss Ruth. And because we would get in trouble for everything, I didn't want to get in trouble for making noise, and I thought I was going to get in trouble for giving birth. So I literally gave birth in the bathroom floor in complete silence. I never said a peep. I never cried out. I just sat in silence because I was a 12-year-old child, and I was afraid that I was going to get in trouble. So I literally gave birth in silence in a bathroom floor. And then when the baby started to cry, I tried to cover her mouth.
Right.
And that's when I immediately came out of whatever the therapist had put me in. And I got mad because I was like, I don't think that's a real memory. But the bottom line is, I went there under a false name. I've had multiple family members tell me I went there pregnant. I have a girl that lived there that said I was pregnant. But none of us had periods. You know, it's just all so confusing. The whole thing is so confusing. And you deal with this. You know, I have a great life. I own a beautiful company. I'm a paramedical tattoo artist, and I help children that have trichotillomania and cancer, and I help women with cancer. I have a great life, but there has been all these handicaps that got me to the point that I am, and a lot of it was caused by living in that hellhole.
But the good news is you got through it. You know, I'm sure there are some girls that came out of there that probably went to drugs and died or something, you know. So you're basically one of the lucky ones, I guess you could say it that way, because you're still here. And
you'd be shocked how many of the boys went to prison that lived in those places and ended up in prison for life.
Yes, there was a lot of it seemed like, go back to the roll-off homes. There was a guy that his name was Martin, brother. We called him Brother Martin. We never knew his first name, but he was a so-called teacher, and he was caught with one of the girls there, and he ended up going to prison for that. So,
yeah,
it was one of the elementary school girls. It wasn't one of the Rebecca Home girls. So, yeah. So,
Yeah, if you look at a lot of the documentaries of the Bethesda girls, I'd say about 50% of them have stories about being sexually abused before they came there. It wasn't that they were wayward girls or bad girls. They had all been sexually abused, and they were acting out. They were begging for help, and they had the audacity to stand up for themselves and tell somebody that they were being molested, and that was a big no-no. You were just supposed to sit down and shut up and take it. And that I can't, it's just shocking to me that these places still exist, that these homes are still in play. And if I can't stress anything, is that they need to be regulated. They have to be regulated. Even the Wills, towards the end, when they knew that they were being watched, they did step up and they became less rigid. And there's a vast difference between the girls that were there in the 70s and early 80s and the girls that were there after they were being watched by the FBI and the social services. They changed. They stepped up. They did better.
Well, yes, they knew they were under the eye. They knew they were being watched, so they had to walk on pins and needles and make sure that everything was correct. But then, of course, they still didn't have a license. Or did they have a license? They didn't have a state license, did they?
They never had a license, and they didn't. Here's what they did, okay? They gave the girls Polaroid cameras and made them take pictures of each other all smiling and happy. They let them, it's like everything that they did was for their bottom dollar, I believe.
Oh, it's always for the dollar, yes.
Because if you continue to abuse the girls and the girls can continue to complain, then you're going to lose your cash cow,
Yep.
So they still beat the girls. They still beat the pregnant girls. They still did some of the things they were doing, but they stepped it up a little bit and made the girls have a little bit more freedom. And they took pictures of all the happy times so that they could say, see, they're not all crying.
Right. It was just a facade, though. Did you ever write home or have people send you letters?
Well, that was another weird thing. We were not allowed to, like, any letters that we wrote home, they would read, and we'd have to rewrite them. And I didn't have family that loved me anyway. Like I said, I was sent there because I had a horrible secret that I could tell. So they, out of sight, out of mind. I think I got one letter the entire time I was there, and it said, Dear Cindy, and it was all blacked out, and it said, Love, Mom. That was it. And so I got one letter the entire time I was there. There are other girls, though, that their mothers sent money every month, and the girls never got the money. They sent beautiful clothes, and the girls never got the clothes. And so one of the moms wrote and said, hey, where's all this money I'm giving my daughter? And so they literally took the girl, woke her up early one morning, took her to the mall, bought her an outfit, took a picture of it with a Polaroid and sent it to her mom and said, see, we are buying her clothes. But they weren't. They were pocketing all the money.
As it's pretty normal for those institutions to do that. And nobody does anything about it because I don't know why they don't do anything about it. They should, but it was like the roll-off homes. They were in Corpus Christi. They were fighting the state because of the license, so they moved to Florida. Then they got into a fight with the state there, so they had to move to Arizona. So like you said, they're constantly moving, and I'm sure the Bethesda Home is opened again, but under a different name. I'm almost pretty sure.
Yeah, and here's the thing. If your child is not allowed to openly communicate with you, it's like they would have their finger on the trigger. If you said anything wrong, they would immediately hang up the phone. If if your child is not allowed to openly speak with you of what they're going through, they're trying to hide something. It's just everything was about control, mind control. And about money. I mean, they would write all the rich families and say, we got a lot of girls here that their families don't send them any money. And so these people were sending thousands upon thousands of dollars. I spoke to a girl the other day that was in a church there in Hattiesburg, and she said that their church would send them thousands of dollars every month and send them food from all the farms. So, I mean, they were, they live, Mr. and Miss Wills live on, or they did up until recently, lived on a horse ranch. Massive $1 million horse ranch. So they made bank out of selling our babies.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. If you go to a lot of the, where's that? It's off of Pat Robinson. He's got a church here. You can look on his website. There's 1,000 ways you can donate. There's not one phone call on there where you can call and ask for food or ask for help. But the second thing that he has on there that's really interesting to me is an adoption agency. Most of these big, huge churches, they take millions upon millions of dollars from people. They don't hand out any help to anybody. They'll tell you that they're helping the people in the Philippines, but they've been helping the people in the Philippines for 30 years, and those people are still living in, Cinderblock huts with dirt floors. So where's all those millions going? It's an easy way to say, hey, yeah, we're helping, these impoverished countries, but we don't know that. There's no regulation for that. But they all have these adoption agencies, which is very interesting to me, how all these big churches have adoption agencies. It's still selling babies.
Maybe they were
Maybe you look close.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think they were under the impression, well, this girl who's pregnant, she's troubled. She probably won't be able to handle a child. So let's give this child or sell this child to a Christian home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That way, there's the baby will get love and affection or whatever, because they probably didn't think that the girls at the home will be able to handle it, which is not true.
And here's the thing: most of the girls they weren't given an option. If you've embarrassed the family, you've allowed yourself to get pregnant, and you're going away. Period. They didn't. If you talk to 90% of the girls that went there, they were drugged, put in the trunk of a car, and drove there. I mean, a lot of them, their memory is they were driving along with the family. Next thing you know, they wake up in Bethesda. And that's another thing I don't understand. Where did they get all the drugs to drug these children? If you go once again and you type in Bethesda, Rebecca, there's countless story after story after story of children that were drugged, and they, put them in the backseat of a car, and they woke up at Bethesda or woke up at Rebecca. Where are those drugs coming from? How do these people all get their hands on all these drugs?
That's a question I guess we'll never be able to answer. They got them somehow.
I mean, there was always, I guess, some preacher that was sitting in the audience, and they're like, hey, we got these bad girls. We need, lithium. I mean, my parents had this, I know for a fact I was drugged. I know what it feels like to be drugged.
Now,
and I walked around like a zombie for the first 3 months I was there. I was drugged. I remember fighting them because I didn't want to drink the milk because it made me feel funny. So my question is, where do they get the drugs?
Were there any?
And why do these?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just curious as to there's so many stories, very similar stories of people being drugged and waking up in Bethesda. So where did the drugs come from? Where did they get them?
Were there any girls over there? Let's say were diabetic or they needed like medication.
There was all kinds of sicknesses there, and most of the time you were told that if you believed in God, He would heal you. Like if a girl had an infection, or so many girls ended up, they didn't take them to the doctor until they started passing out in the hallways. I mean, I saw crazy stuff. I saw girls have miscarriages, and they didn't take them to the doctor.
Wow.
They would scream and scream and scream and cry and cry and cry. And, they would stand over them and tell them that you just want to go to the hospital so you can run away, or you're just trying to give us a hard time, or you just want attention. There was one girl, it was a really sad story. She had a learning disability, and she was there, and they beat her every single day because she couldn't memorize. Every single day that poor girl got beat, every single day, because she had a learning disability and she couldn't memorize. And they would sit her in front of the PACE program, and she couldn't read. So at the end of the day, because she had nobody assisting her, nobody helping her, all they saw was she had not completed her work, and they would beat her. Every day she got beat. That girl to this day is a homeless girl because no one ever acknowledged that she had a learning disability. It's shocking how many of those girls, just crazy stories, a lot of cover-ups of pretty horrific stuff. And, she ended up getting kicked out. She found out that if she told them she was gay, they would get rid of her. And I think she lived there for like 4 years, and they finally got rid of her. There was a guy named Sandman. It was his sister, and he went and found her. and she's been homeless pretty much all of her adult life, and she still can't read or write. And so that's what breaks my heart. If you're a Christian and you're supposed to be helping these kids, at the very least, they could have taught her how to read and write. They were too busy judging her and, beating her because she wouldn't conform. But you can't conform what you don't have.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
So once again, it's setting you up for failure. And when you fail, they abuse you. That wasn't discipline, that was abuse.
I agree 100%. That's what it was. Mostly the mental too. I mean, to tell the girls that they're no good, they're whores or sluts or whatever. That hurts. It hurts a lot, and it damages. I mean, it might not be physical damage, but it's mental, and it can go on for
It's
years.
definitely mental. Mental abuse is worse than physical abuse. Most girls have a story when they would come in. They would literally take everything you had, because what you had on you when you came in was of the world. And they would stand over your suitcase, and all the girls would pick up each article of clothing and go, "Oh my God, you wear this? You're a slut. You're a whore. You won't be wearing this anymore. You won't be needing this anymore." So from the second you got there, it was humiliation and control and stripping your dignity.
Were you there?
And I have a weird, vague memory of being in a blackout room. I remember screaming and being in this pitch black room and having this religious tape in the background playing. And I'm screaming and screaming and screaming until I lost my voice. And I remember them taking me out of there and the light hurting my eyes. And I don't know where that blackout room was, and I haven't heard much other girls talk about it, but I specifically remember being put in a blackout room. I think it was in the laundry room. There was like a door, and there's a little backup space or something. I don't know. It was weird. But once again, it's hard because you have so many blocked memories,
Right.
and you don't want to over-exaggerate or lie. But the things that I do remember are pretty horrific. I can't imagine what I can't remember.
Were you there when that girl was hit? When some of the girls tried to escape, or they did escape, and one of the girls got killed?
I came in right after that. So because of those girls running away, our lockdown was tremendous. Like, we weren't allowed to even go near the window to look out of the window. We weren't allowed to communicate at all because, the girls being able to talk to each other is what helped them, pull together and make an escape plan. And I'm best friends with one of the girls that ran away with those girls. She actually made it all the way back to Virginia. A truck driver picked her up, her and another girl, and the truck drivers brought them all the way back to Virginia.
Oh.
And these were children. I mean, I remember there was a girl in there that was only 9 years old, and it just, these were not hardened criminals. These were children who, the worst thing they ever did was smoke a cigarette or listen to a rock song or put on a pair of pants at their girlfriend's house at a sleepover. Or they looked at a boy. And then there was another half of them that were only in there because they told that they were being abused. And that was a big no-no.
Well, that's, I don't know what to say. That's just absolutely wild. Some of the and like you said, when you're listening to rock song, this is a fundamental Baptist church, okay, fundamentalist, so to speak, and you listen to rock music, you look at boys, you basically are of the devil. That's how it is. If you're not conforming,
Exactly.
if you don't believe the Bible and believe every word it says or practice what it says, then you're of the devil, and that's how they justified it, basically.
Yep. I had made friends. One of my happy memories that was when I got to work in the kitchen, because I got to make broccoli, and I would steal the broccoli and eat it. So I would not be so hungry. So it was a happy memory of getting to work in the kitchen and feeling like I was in control of something,
Yeah.
And I looked over at the other lady, and I said something. I sang. She was an older girl. She had been there for a long time, and she was one of the helpers that helped keep the girls in place. And I remember looking at her and I sang, "Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?" when I walked into the kitchen.
Uh-huh.
And she literally smacked me across the face. And then that night I got paddled 10 times because I sang a worldly song. But in my mind, it was just, I had heard that in my family. You know, my granddad would walk in the kitchen and he would look at my grandma and he'd say, "Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?" So I didn't even realize it was a song because I had come from a home where we weren't allowed to listen to music because my stepdad was a preacher. And we weren't allowed to listen to music. I didn't even know it was a song. I just knew it was something my granddad had sang to my grandmother. It was an endearment, you know, type of expression.
It was a Hank Williams
and I remember
song.
getting smacked to the floor.
Hank Williams. That's who sang it.
Well, I didn't know that. And I wasn't being a bad girl. It was a form of endearment. Like, "Hey, I'm happy to see you. What you cooking?" You know?
Right. You were happy.
But it's like,
that turned to terror.
Yeah, it was yeah. It's like, you weren't allowed to be happy ever. You weren't allowed to smile ever. And, you know, like I said, we all have different stories. Some of the girls that were there later, their experiences were different. Like, and they say they watched movies and ate popcorn. When I was there, that was a definite no-no. I can't imagine ever being allowed to do that when I was there.
Well, I think it's because they were being watched, so they had to be nicer. Who was it? I think it was Ginger said that. But I don't know. She never said what kind of movies they were. I'm sure they were. I don't know. Maybe it was Lester Roloff preaching. I don't know what kind of movies they would have been allowed to watch. You know, but
yeah, and she talked about having friendships. When I was there, friendships were not allowed. Eye contact was not allowed. Smiling, being happy. I mean, my memory is my memory, and what little bit of memory I have is falling asleep at night, and I would wait till I fell asleep or till the lights were out to cry, and I would try to cry as silently as I could because I didn't want to get in trouble for crying. And I remember every once in a while you would hear another girl crying, and that's what you went to bed to, is hearing girls cry.
Now, did they have girls?
And they did it silently.
Did they have girls there that were true believers, if you know what I mean? They were,
Absolutely.
truly
they
saved.
Were hardcore, and they prided themselves in finding fault in you.
And snitching you out.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and they were rewarded for it. And, it's almost like Lord of the Flies. Like, I don't think that those girls, I think you had to settle in and survive the best that you could.
Uh-huh.
And so for some girls, being a snitch, being looked at as a trusted girl was their way to survive. I've had one girl that says she remembers being my helper. And, she apologized if she ever did anything that was abusive, because that was, being abusive to the other girls was rewarded, that was a good thing. Crying, showing emotion, being happy, these were not good things. So you lived in an environment where you were constantly being watched. Literally, when you took a dump, how much toilet paper you used, how much you ate, if you didn't eat, how loud you walked. I mean, everything was monitored to the point where it was like, and you got to think, there were, they have those programs where the drug addicts, they have those homes where the men and women come in and get help because they're a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the people that they would use as staff members, not, people that have been trained to help children or deal with children or had any kind of college education. They were an ex-drug addict who had turned their life around, and all of a sudden they're now over you. And most of them came from violent, abusive homes, and that was the only way they knew how to discipline you, was through violence and abuse, because it was kind of normal for them. And so it's like asking the fox to watch the hen house.
And I'm sure the girls had no idea about their background. They could have been a sex offender for all they knew. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I grew up in that environment. I mean, my stepdad, granddad, uncle all went to prison for it. And they were all deacons. And I mean, I remember going to the church on Wednesday nights. We had counseling. And the preacher and the deacons would ask what my dad had done that week. And me and my sister would tell them. And they would immediately lay their hands on Brother Ola and be crying, Dear God, please help Brother Ola. Dear God, please do. And he got all the compassion, all of the sympathy, all of the love, all of the support. And then they would spin around with disgust and look at me and my sister and tell us that we asked for it and that we needed to learn to be, obedient, honor thy mother and father. We'd get that whole lecture. And then a week later, we would walk back in there. We would tell what Daddy did that week. And then they would all pray over Brother Ola and then spin around and yell at me and my sister and call us whores and sluts. We were 10 and 9. And that's that kind of environment where pedophiles are protected. But children are seen as being defiant by speaking up. And even when they were paddling us, if a girl put her hand back there, she got 10 more whacks. If you flinched, you got 10 more whacks. At Bethesda, if you flinched, I saw, when they hit you with all their might. And if you dropped down to the ground or flinched or tried to put your hand back there, you'd get beat more because that was a sign of defiance. By the time I left there, I knew how to stand there with no emotion, no feeling, and get beat. And that's what it was. It was being beat. They were beating you with a board.
I remember Principal Carter, that was at the Rebecca Christian School. He had a big, gigantic paddle, and what he did was he put holes in it so he could swing it faster. So, yeah, needless to say, that left some bruises. But I also heard on the lawsuit that the Southern Poverty Law Center did was after they would whip these girls or paddle them, they would put them in hot water to keep the bruises from showing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And once again, I went to a Christian home before I went to Bethesda, and that, basically that's where my stepdad, dad, and uncle were all deacons there. And the assistant principal or the principal of this Christian school, not only did he paddle the girls, but you had to drop your panties down to your ankles and lift your skirt up and lay over his desk. And he would paddle you on your naked butt. And that was acceptable.
And get a cheap thrill out of it, too, I'm sure.
Exactly. So, I had already been ingrained, that you didn't fight back. You let these people do these things, and you just don't question it because you're not allowed to. And that makes it really hard when you I lived in foster care until I turned 18, and then they released me. I became homeless, instantly homeless. And that's why I'm not buying that the stress is what caused our periods to stop. Because there is nothing more stressful than to be an 18-year-old girl with no form of identification, no family, no money, living on the streets. And I still had my periods. So I'm not buying it that it was the stress that caused these girls' cycles to stop. Because a lot of these girls had, like I said, I've lived in many homes with multiple girls, and I've never seen that. Except for the lesser roll-off homes, these Bible homes, all these girls don't have periods.
Yeah, and like you said, it could be some sort of drug that they were giving you to stop that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I remember fighting it. I didn't want to drink my milk because after I drank my milk, I felt very lethargic, and I just felt like I was going to throw up. Like I would drink the milk, and then I would feel really sick, and I would feel really dizzy and really sleepy. And, you're feeling dizzy, you're feeling sleepy, you're feeling groggy, and you got somebody yelling at you that you need to, do 20 jumping jacks or scrub the floor on your hands and knees, and you can barely keep your eyes open.
Well, maybe that's something to research, kind of research some what kind of drugs make a woman stop her period.
I did a while back, and I can't remember the name of the drug was, but here's what's interesting. And this is, once again, where the confusion is about the food intake. Because, we did get 3 meals a day. We should not have been that hungry. But there's a particular drug that Miss Wills admitted to giving a particular drug. And when I looked up that drug, the side effects are, A, you stop your period, B, you have seizures, and C, you feel like you're starving all the time. Those were 3 of the side effects of this drug that Miss Wills admitted to giving us. On the witness stand, she admitted to giving it to us. And she also admitted to giving us dog warmers, like dog warmer pills. So this particular drug that she admitted on stand to giving us caused those 3 things: the feeling of constantly being starved, the not having your period, and having seizures. And that's what's interesting. when I was there, how many girls would have seizures, and they would call them fits. They'd always say, "Oh, she's having a fit," and we would all have to lay on top of her and hold her down. Or if she was too strong and too violent, and Mr. and Miss Rose weren't there, and it was just that old lady, they would tell us to run in our rooms and lock the girl in the hallway. And you could hear her out in the hallway thrashing around and screaming and begging for help. And we were supposed to sing and drown out her cries. I've seen girls have seizures in their beds. I've seen girls have seizures in the hallways. I've seen, it was just, I saw tons of girls have seizures. Like I said, I don't have a lot of memory, but that was traumatic. There was this one girl, she was really large, and she would have these convulsive, violent seizures. And we always thought she was going to die. And nobody would do anything. It was considered a fit. It was the devil coming out of her. And nobody helped her. You held her down, or you locked her in a hallway where she was left to her own demise to thrash around.
That's the only explanation they had. The devil. It was the devil that did it. So.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
And once again, the failure thing. If you looked at them, they would look at you and go, "You're looking at me with an attitude," and you're like, "No, I'm not." And then you would get in trouble because you backtalked. So either way, your ass was in trouble.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. If you did everything perfect, you were still going to be in trouble because you looked at them the wrong way. And that's a scary place to live your life. Yeah. And that's what I mean about, a lot of us can't put our finger on it. We don't have these grandiose stories of being beat till we bled. I mean, some of us do. I remember bleeding a couple times or being bruised a few times. Mm-hmm. But it was the mental abuse that has affected us. Like when I found the Bethesda site, I was shaking so hard that my teeth were chattering, and I threw up all over the parking lot. And then I went to the bank and couldn't make eye contact and couldn't form words. That's the effect that place had on me. And a lot of girls have the same thing. It's like when they talk about Bethesda, they completely shut down. That doesn't come from a happy, joyful girls' home,
No.
That comes from some severe mental abuse.
And physical abuse as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it affects every aspect of your life. You learn not to say no. You learn not to set boundaries. You learn that you will people please to the point of nauseum, where you don't want to make anybody upset ever. And you pick horrible relationships because you have no self-esteem. I mean, that place damaged us for years and years and years to come. And I think that there has to be some type of regulation because that kind of abuse sticks with these people for the rest of their lives.
And this is why I'm doing these stories because, a lot of parents, well, back in the day, there was no internet, so they couldn't search and find websites, but now they don't have an excuse. They can go on the internet, look at everything, look at both sides of the coin. Okay, this website's claiming that it's a reputable place. Are there any reviews on it? You know what I mean? So it's all about making the people aware, so they don't go through this.
Yeah, and Mr. Fountain that was the heroin addict, the home that he opened up, they would set up fight circles, even at Mountain Park. The children that came into Mountain Park, they're all adults now. They all have broken noses they never went to the hospital and got set. Usually the first day they were there, it was either a staff member that broke their nose or one of the children. And they would set up fight circles. They would make them fight. And if you didn't fight good enough for their entertainment, they would walk over and knock you out. The staff just walk over and knock them out. They would strip them naked, make them go to bed naked in front of the other boys. It was a constant, stripping of dignity, stripping of your mind, stripping of anything that made you human. I mean, there's some horror stories that come out of that Bethel home and what they did, and make them dig their own graves.
I heard about
and
that.
And then stand over you with a gun. They would stick pit bulls on them. They would put them in the field and go, run, they run. And when the kids would take off running, they would stick the pit bulls on them. Right. One boy, talks about they ripped his sack off, like his scrotum, ripped it. And they had to take him to the hospital. And when he got there, they just looked at the police and go, hey, you ran. The chief of police there tried to shut it down. And see, another thing they do is they only take kids from out of town because local kids, you could get into court faster. But if a
Right.
kid was from, 20 states over, most of their parents didn't make it into court, or the child didn't make it into court. But he tried and tried and tried to shut the place down. He went in there and found kids that had been living in cages. They would literally put them in blackout rooms and in cages with buckets to poop in.
Mm.
And they would stick pit bulls on them. They would make them dig their own graves. I mean, it was a constant mental abuse. Wake up all hours of the night to beat them, to make them fight for their entertainment. It was horrific what they did to those boys.
And this is the reason why a lot of young kids now are getting out of the church. More of them are becoming atheists and everything else because the mental abuse, the constant abuse. So.
Yep.
But
So if I can say anything, these places have to be regulated because it is a long-term effect.
Yes. Cindy, thank you very much. That was very eye-opening. And I'm sure that everyone that's going to listen to this is going to have their eyes open as well. So,
Well, thank you for letting me share. And once again, it's this has to stop because no child should ever go through this. And at least in the prisons, there's regulations. These children don't have the same rights as criminals, and they're children, not grown men that have committed horrific crimes. These are children
yeah.
that most have committed no crimes.
All right.
And they should not have to endure this kind of suffering, and it affects them for life.
Yes, it's not just for years. It's a lifetime. It's a lifetime.
It is.
So.
It affects everything. Self-esteem. A lot of these women have gastrointestinal problems, female problems. A lot of the girls came out of there never, ever being able to have another child.
How did
took
you
away their ability to have children?
How did you ever get rid of that black tongue?
How did I ever do what?
Get rid of the black tongue.
I'm sorry. You're going to have to say it one more time. I can't hear you.
You said you had the black tongue?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing.
Well,
when I got out and I would
yes.
go to doctors, they would ask me about my medical history, and I would always bring up black tongue, and they would always say they'd never heard of it. And I had a doctor one day, and I said, have you ever heard of black tongue? And he said, yes. He said, the women in concentration camps used to get black tongue. And it's literally where your tongue turns black, and you can scrape the fungus off, and it's from malnourishment. The body just becomes so it's covered. You don't have any good bacteria to fight the bad bacteria, and your body is so malnourished it can't fight it, and your tongue literally turns black, and you can scrape it off. It's like a fungus.
Well, when you got out, did they give you any medication to get rid of it?
No.
No.
By the time I got out, I had it twice when I was there, and you have it for about a week, and you have like extreme diarrhea for a week, and it makes you very, very weak. And I had it twice when I was there. And I've only found one doctor, and he said that he had written a paper on it when he was in medical school. And he had written a paper about black tongue, and it was most commonly found in women in concentration camps. Yeah. And it's from malnourishment.
Wow. Well, Cindy, thank you very much for your, I don't know if I want to call it a testimony. I don't want to use that word. But
I think it's more of a warning to parents.
Yes. Like I said, people do their due diligence, will hear this and go, oh, maybe I should check, go a little bit deeper and check out these places a lot, vent them out a little bit more.
And there also needs to be state regulation. You can't abuse children and call it religion. Abuse is abuse. You can't beat children. You can't set up fights. I mean, you're not allowed to even fight dogs in most cities, but you're allowed to fight children. So, it's also the responsibility of the state to start regulating, to keep an eye out, to keep a watchful eye.
Yeah.
Because, abuse and religion are two entirely separate things. And you can't say, oh, I can abuse these children under my religious exemptions. We can't do that anymore. It has to stop. There was a movie on Netflix that came out about a gentleman who his preacher told his parents that he had the feminine gene or the feminine demon. And they took him to Bethel, and they put him in a cage, and they played religious tapes. They starved him, and then when that didn't work, they would take him downstairs, show him pictures of men kissing, and then they would take turns raping him.
Ugh.
And that was just on Netflix, like a month ago.
Oh.
And it was from the Bethel Home, the where the fountain guy was.
Right. Well, the Catholics are having a problem with that too. So,
Absolutely.
Yes.
They've been having a problem with that for years, and nobody cared. Sometimes people, like my friend, didn't want to speak up because it's embarrassing to tell the world that these things happen. But for me, it's more important that I do tell the world these things happen and that people start caring. It's a subject most people don't want to talk about. And most children are just so grateful to be out of there. We used to all agree. We would write our names in our Bibles in the binder. We would pull the Bible as far out as we could, and we'd write each other's names. And we would promise each other, when I get out, I'm going to call your family, and I'm going to tell them what's happening. But when we got out, we were so afraid to speak out because we were afraid we'd go back, that we never helped each other. And we carry that guilt forever, that we didn't help each other, but we were afraid to speak out, to speak up. Because if you did, you may go back to hell. So you just never talked about it.
yes.
And then all of a sudden you're 30 years old or 40 years old and you're sitting in a Food Line parking lot losing your damn mind because it affects you, and you can hide it and you can cover it up. You can pretend it didn't happen, but it did. And we all carry that guilt. We all carry, and we shouldn't. That guilt is not ours to carry. But we do. And we've all bound together. We all love each other. Like I said, a lot of our stories are vastly different because we lived there at different times. But I know this is my story, and I know it's the story of 1,000 other girls, and it needs to stop, and we need to talk about it. It's really important.
And let people know exactly what happened, because, like I said before I started this, I checked YouTube and all the other places. There is no stories of Bethesda. None. I'm the only one that's done one. So
yeah, they trained us really good to keep our mouth shut.
Yeah. All right. Well, Cindy, like I said, thank you for being on the show. It was great. I hope.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope that
hopefully more girls will come forward.
Yes. When they hear your story, they might come forward, and it's, like I said, it's something that's got to be told, even though the Bethesda home isn't there anymore. Like you said, there's other homes out there that need to be regulated, and this will hopefully inspire parents to, like I said, do their due diligence and make the right choice.
Yes. If you look at the Hezbollah house, it's very hard to pronounce it. They recently did a documentary on Dr. Phil, and the girls talked about having forced pelvic exams and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it is still happening today. It's called a Hezbollah house. It's HEPH something, Hezbollah house or something like that. It was just on Dr. Phil like a month and a half ago. Okay. And it was a 2-day documentary. The girls all talked about being forced to eat pig slop, being forced to eat dog food, being abused. And they had a couple girls on there that have, I guess, Stockholm syndrome. They were going, oh, that's all a lie. And then Dr. Phil basically said that he believed it was true and that there was nothing that could be done about it because there's no regulations. And all of us girls got excited because we thought that Dr. Phil was going to get the place shut down. And in the end, he just looked into the camera and said, sorry, I believe it. I believe this happened, but there's nothing we can do about it.
That's sad. That's sad.
Yep.
All right. Well, like I said, why don't you go ahead and stay on the line, okay? And,
okay.
Let me go ahead and close this out. So everybody out there, like I said, this is Cindy. She's giving her story. And like I said, make sure you do your due diligence and check the place out thoroughly. All right. So for the Hammer Podcast, I'm Jason. You take care of yourselves. You take care of each other.